What if the very thing everyone warns you about pulling away from the world isn't a sign you're broken, but the final proof you're waking up? Forget what you've been told about emotional withdrawal. This isn't depression. According to the depth psychology of Carl Jung, you might be entering the most critical and most misunderstood stage of psychological rebirth. If you've felt a growing distance from others, a deep boredom with social rituals, and a quiet sense that the life you're living isn't truly yours, this isn't a collapse. It's a crucial evolution. You aren't losing your mind. You're on the verge of finding your soul, and what happens next redefines everything. Picture this. You're by yourself, and the texts from friends pile up unread. Family voices concern, labeling your quiet as sadness. But you're not sad. You're complete. Finished with performances. Done with conversations that feel like empty echoes. A fundamental gear has shifted inside you, and you can't force it back into the old rhythm. This retreat feels unnerving because our culture worships constant connection. You're told to network, to be social, to always be on. Jung's research reveals a shocking truth. Sometimes the healthiest psychological move you can make is to step back entirely. Not as a permanent exile, but as a vital season of inner alchemy that most people never permit themselves to have. Well-meaning people will pathologize your stillness. They'll recommend solutions for a problem you don't have. But after a lifetime of study, Jung identified this not as illness, but as the threshold of individuation, the ultimate process of becoming who you were meant to be before the world told you who to be. The void you feel isn't emptiness. It's the fertile ground where your authentic self is preparing to grow. Here's the radical shift in understanding. Your psychological energy is finite. To construct what Jung termed the self, energy must be withdrawn from the persona, the social mask you've worn for years. This feels like a death because, in a real sense, an old identity is dying. But it's not destruction. It's a sacred reinvestment. Your unconscious mind is pulling vital resources away from maintaining false fronts and draining relationships to fund the construction of something genuine. Society misnames this process. They call it isolation or avoidance. Jung called it sacred detachment, a necessary departure from the collective noise to hear your own inner voice. You aren't fleeing from life. You are, for the first time, journeying toward the life that is authentically yours. Throughout his work, Jung mapped this pattern. The psyche, he saw, operates like an ecosystem with limited resources. When too much energy flows outward to meet expectations and uphold appearances, the core self begins to starve. This withdrawal is the psyche's emergency protocol, a shutdown of non-essential systems to protect what matters most. It's psychological triage. And it feels brutal because it is brutal. Consider the process of metamorphosis. From the outside, the caterpillar's chrysalis appears to be a tomb. Inside, a liquefaction occurs. That total dissolution isn't death. It's the necessary precondition for wings. Jung found our inner transformation follows the same painful, essential law. Your old self must deconstruct before your true self can take form. The mistake is believing this phase should feel good. It doesn't. It feels like neutrality, which terrifies those accustomed to feeling anything, even if that something was anxiety or the buzz of people-pleasing. This chrysalis stage cannot be hurried. It takes precisely the time it needs. Fighting the process only prolongs the tension. Surrendering to it allows the natural unfolding. Let me show you the signals this is happening within you. First, superficial interaction becomes agonizing. You used to navigate small talk effortlessly. Now it feels like your life force is seeping away with every trivial exchange. This isn't you becoming rude. Jung would say your psyche is rejecting empty calories because it needs every ounce of nourishment for the profound internal work underway. He named this psychic economy. Just as your body conserves strength when healing, your psyche conserves energy during rebirth. Chit-chat isn't just dull now. It's experienced as a theft stealing precious moments from the soul's urgent labor. Second, you stop casting blame because you begin to encounter your own shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow is key here. It's all the disowned parts of yourself you've rejected and projected onto others. When you resent someone's arrogance, you might be seeing your own unclaimed confidence reflected back. During this withdrawal, these projections start to dissolve. You can't sustain the illusion that the problem is always out there because you're awakening to the reality that everything you've judged in the world exists as a potential within you, too. This makes drama feel tedious. You used to get pulled into conflicts and emotional storms. Now it all seems like a play where everyone is unknowingly battling their own reflection. You're not superior. You're simply becoming conscious, and consciousness makes unconscious games unbearable to play. This is a primary source of your loneliness. Most people are still performing in scripts you can no longer read. This leads to the third sign. You enter what Jung termed the night sea journey. In myths, the hero is swallowed into darkness, cut off from the familiar world. Jung understood this isn't loneliness. It's the essential solitude required for metamorphosis. You cannot reshape yourself while maintaining every old connection and habit. You need this isolation the way a seed needs the dark, silent earth. Growth is happening where no one can witness it, not even you. This journey feels endless. You don't know if it will last months or years. Jung found the duration depends on one thing, your conscious cooperation. Resistance creates stagnation. Acceptance allows movement. In this phase, your inner world may become vividly active. Dreams intensify. Meaningful coincidences or synchronicities may increase. You're developing what Jung called a living relationship with your unconscious. It communicates through symbols and gut knowing, not logic. Most ignore this language, but learning it is crucial for navigating the dark. Now, here is the critical danger Jung explicitly warned about. There comes a point where your persona, the mask, fractures completely. The act you've used to gain approval and function in society simply stops working. You lack the energy to perform. You can't fake interest. You can't smile through soul-crushing exchanges. This breakdown is terrifying because you've mistaken the mask for your face. When it cracks, you fear you are breaking. But Jung discovered the opposite. The authentic you has been suffocating beneath that mask for a lifetime. The breakdown isn't you falling apart. It's the false self finally releasing its grip so the real self can breathe. The panic is just the ego realizing it's no longer in charge. We must draw a vital distinction. Jung emphasized the difference between dissociation and individuation. Dissociation is escaping reality because it's too painful. You numb out, disconnect. Individuation is confronting reality so deeply that you withdraw from all its false versions. You're not leaving the world. You're leaving the collective illusion. One is a flight from pain. The other is a quest for truth. How can you tell which is which? Look at direction. Are you withdrawing because everything is too much and you want to feel nothing? That's dissociation. Are you withdrawing because surface-level existence has lost all meaning and you are searching for substance? That's individuation. This raises the peril Jung addressed that many overlook. What if you get stuck? What if the withdrawal becomes a permanent state? He called this the shadow of the process. If you linger in the hermit phase without conscious intent, you risk two fates. First, spiritual ego inflation. You start to believe you've transcended human needs, looking down on those trapped in ordinary life. A different kind of trap in spiritual disguise. Second, total despair. You conclude life is meaningless and genuine connection is a myth, settling into isolation as a tomb, not a cocoon. Jung called this psychological death without rebirth. The razor's edge lies in holding the tension between opposites, solitude and community, death and renewal. Collapse into one side and you get stuck. True individuation means enduring that tension until a new synthesis emerges. The goal is not eternal exile. It's to return, transformed. The withdrawal is a temporary descent, a necessary ending before a truer beginning. You go into the dark not to stay, but to retrieve what you left behind, your essence, and bring it back to the world. You reconnect, but now from soul, not mask. The isolation ends, replaced by a connection that doesn't drain you because it's real. So how do you navigate this? Jung advocated for active waiting, what some traditions call wu-wei or effortless action. You don't force motivation. You don't manufacture false goals. Instead, you wait attentively, you listen. This is excruciatingly hard in a culture obsessed with doing. But the psyche works on its own timeline. You can't pull a seed from the ground to make it grow faster. You create the conditions: silence, solitude, ruthless self-honesty. Then you trust. In this active waiting, practice self-observation without judgment. Notice what pulls you without immediately turning it into a career plan. Maybe it's walking in the woods. Just walk. Maybe it's an urge to create. Just create. These are whispers from the soul. Jung taught that soul motivation differs utterly from ego motivation. Ego motivation is urgent, anxious, and draining. It says, you must do this or else. Soul motivation is calm, magnetic, and energizing. It says, you get to do this because it's who you are. The withdrawal phase is extinguishing the noisy ego drive so the quiet soul call can finally be heard. Your emptiness is not a lack of purpose, but the presence of a purpose too authentic for your old self to recognize. After the withdrawal, if navigated with courage, everything changes. You return to relationships, but you can no longer perform. Some bonds will dissolve because they were contracts between masks, not souls. This hurts, but it's the necessary sacrifice of the unlived life. New connections become possible soul-level recognitions. You'll meet people who don't need your mask. They resonate with your authenticity. These relationships are energizing, spacious, and deep. The work you do transforms. Before, you may have chosen paths based on status or approval. After, you align with what Jung called incarnated purpose, your essential nature finding expression in the world. This might not bring conventional success, but it brings integrity, which Jung believed is the only success that matters. So, if you're in this silent, withdrawn space right now, consider this from a Jungian perspective. You are exactly where you need to be. The darkness is preparation. Let's speak more carefully about this darkness, because to call it simply preparation might make it sound easier than it is. The truth is, this descent, and it is a descent, can feel like death. Not metaphorical death, not poetic death, but the actual terrifying sensation that the person you have been is dissolving, and you have no guarantee that anything coherent will emerge on the other side. This is what Jung called the nigredo, the blackening, the first stage of psychological transformation. It's the phase where everything that was false begins to rot away, where the masks you've worn crack and crumble, where the stories you've told yourself about who you are and what you want reveal themselves as precisely that stories, not truths. And when those stories collapse, it can feel like you're collapsing with them. You might find yourself unable to engage with things that once felt important. Conversations that once animated you now feel hollow. Activities that once provided meaning now seem pointless. Relationships that once felt essential now feel like obligations you can barely fulfill. This isn't depression in the clinical sense, though it might share some features. This is something deeper. It's the psyche's way of withdrawing energy from everything that is not truly you, so that energy can be redirected toward what is. Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own necessities. When you enter this withdrawn space, something within you, something wiser than your conscious ego, has decided that the old configuration is no longer sustainable. The persona you've been presenting to the world, the adaptive self you constructed to survive your particular childhood, culture, and circumstances, has reached its limit. It can't take you where you need to go. So it's being dismantled, whether you consciously chose this or not. This is why fighting the process is often futile and always exhausting. Your conscious mind might be terrified, bargaining, trying desperately to return to normal, but your unconscious is already committed to the transformation. It's already pulled you into the chrysalis, and just as a caterpillar cannot stop its dissolution once the process has begun, you cannot halt this psychological metamorphosis once it's truly underway. The solitude you're experiencing isn't just you pulling away from others, though it might look that way from the outside. It's also others naturally falling away as your energy withdraws from maintaining connections that were never authentic. People who were attached to your persona, rather than your true self, will often exit during this phase, sometimes dramatically, sometimes through gradual drift. This can be profoundly disorienting, especially if you've built your identity around being needed, being helpful, being the glue that holds things together. But here's what Jung would remind you. Those relationships were predicated on your false self. They required your ongoing performance to exist. When you stop performing, they reveal their true nature. They were never connections to you, but to a role you were playing. Their dissolution, painful as it is evidence that the transformation is working. The false is being cleared away to make space for the real. In this darkness, you might encounter what Jung called the shadow, all the parts of yourself you've repressed, denied, or projected onto others. The anger you were never allowed to feel. The selfishness you were taught was evil. The ambition you learned to hide. The needs you were conditioned to consider shameful. These aspects haven't disappeared just because you've denied them. They've been living in your unconscious, influencing your behavior in ways you couldn't see. Now, in this withdrawn space, they're emerging. And this can be disturbing. You might discover that you're angry deeply, profoundly angry at people you thought you'd forgiven. You might realize you resent relationships you thought you cherished. You might find yourself having thoughts and feelings that seem completely incompatible with your self-image as a good, kind, spiritual person. This is not you becoming worse. This is you becoming whole. Jung insisted that wholeness requires the integration of shadow material, not its continued repression. The goal is not to be perfect, but to be complete. And completeness means acknowledging and integrating everything you are, including the parts that don't fit your idealized self-concept. This integration doesn't happen in the bright light of social performance. It happens in the darkness of solitude, where you can finally be honest about what's really there. The performance you're recognizing as false, let's be specific about what that entailed. Perhaps you performed competence when you were actually overwhelmed. Perhaps you performed happiness when you were actually numb. Perhaps you performed certainty when you were actually lost. Perhaps you performed strength when you were actually depleted. Perhaps you performed connection when you were actually lonely, even in crowded rooms. These performances weren't necessarily conscious lies. They were adaptive strategies. They were how you survived environments that couldn't hold your authentic complexity. They were how you earned love in systems where love was conditional. They were how you maintained belonging in groups that required conformity. They served you, in their way, for as long as they could. But now they're suffocating you, and your psyche knows it. The intentionality of this solitude is crucial to understand. Your withdrawal is not a failure of willpower or social skill. It's not laziness or avoidance or depression. though it might superficially resemble these things. It's a necessary regression in service of development. What Jung called reculer pour mieux sauter, stepping back to jump farther. You're not collapsing, you're composting. You're not dying, you're gestating. But trusting this process requires a kind of faith that's difficult in our culture. We're taught that progress is linear, that growth means constantly moving forward, that any backward movement is failure. So if you are in the darkness now, know this. Your withdrawal is not avoidance. Your silence is not emptiness. Your solitude is not loneliness. These are the conditions necessary for a transformation that cannot happen any other way. You are not broken. You are breaking open. You are not falling apart. You are falling into place, the place you've always been meant to occupy but never had the chida, strength or clarity to claim until now. Honor this. Trust this. Live this as fully as you're able. Because on the other side of this darkness is not just light, but a light that's finally, authentically, unshakably yours. If this insight resonated with you, please like this video. It helps this channel, Insight Wave, bring depth and clarity to more people. And subscribe for more journeys into understanding the psyche. The transformation you're undergoing is ancient, archetypal, and sacred. You're not alone in the darkness. You're in the company of every soul that has ever chosen to become real.